So recently, I ran a new PB in the 5K of 16 minutes and 44 minutes, smashing my previous PB of 17:21 minutes that I did at a park run last year. So that's a 37-second improvement on my previous time, which it worked out to be 8 seconds faster per kilometer. So that's covering an average of 40 meters per kilometer, which totals up to be 200 meters ahead of my previous self running that PB. So how did I make such a big improvement? Well, that's what this video is going to be about today. So on a personal note first, so this was a milestone that I set for myself 3 months ago, that I wanted to run a 5K PB. So I'm an 800 meter runner, and for me, the reason why I wanted to run a 5K PB is I wanted to signify and have some feedback to show that I'm on track to achieve my quest, which, if you're unfamiliar with who I am and my quest, then I encourage you to check out a previous video that I made earlier, which is a short video titled Origin Story. So I'll leave a link right there for you to check it out. So before I go into exactly how I got that 5K PB, there's an important concept that you first got to understand that I came up with that will be the most useful thing to you to use in your own life, to know exactly how to achieve any goal that you set for yourself, and to have as like a guiding star, so then you don't get lost in all the mess on all the do these 5 tips or do those 10 tips or do those whatevers that everyone else is saying, which it can get quite noisy, and you start to think, well, how exactly do I get to that PB if Bob is telling me to run longer and then Greg is telling me to run shorter? You know, in the fitness world, a lot of advice can get very conflicting, and that happened to me, and I got lost in the journey as well from getting all these conflicting views. But what I found was a great guiding star that allowed me to know exactly what worked for me was this concept that I'm going to be talking about right now. So I call it improving the process. So I know it sounds straightforward, but don't be mistaken like most, because it's important that you understand the deeper logic about it to truly make sense of it. It's like with most things, like you can read a book, you can read the back cover of a book and go, wow, I know exactly what the book's about. But there's a lot more to a book than just the synopsis at the back of the page, because there's a lot that is missed out and summarized that essentially is important for you to actually truly understand how to apply this in your life. So before, when I would set a goal for myself, I would get pretty lost in exactly how to achieve that goal, because of, well, one, how far away it is, and then two, you know, my lack of experience on the topic in general. So, and what exactly it took to achieve that goal. So what I used to do is I would just completely copy what someone else who already could do what I wanted to do, and exactly everything about them. So for example, my previous self, I wanted to run a sub 2 minute for an 800. And I stumbled across this YouTuber named Nick Simmons, who's a 2-time Olympic runner, 800 meter runner, and he has a PB of 1:42 for the 800. So what I used to do is I used to completely copy his nutrition, his sleep, his training, everything. And, you know, at first there is some merit to doing that, because, you know, if you have nothing to base upon, like you have no knowledge whatsoever on how to get there, you know, it's good to copy some of the principles that someone who already has done it does. But essentially, which I'll talk about a little bit after this point that I'm going to make, what works for someone may not always work for you. And for you to achieve that same result, it may require you to do something different. So where me just copying this Olympic pro runner as training routine went wrong was one of the things he would do was he would run every single day. And for me, I didn't take into effect that I'm looking at, copying someone has a training age that's like 10 years or so on me. So what I did was I copied that aspect as well. So I went from running 11K a week to running every single day, jumping up to 48K a week. And, as you can tell, at the start, I was having progress, I was making progress, I was getting fitter. But after 3-4 months, I started to get shin splints and I started to get runner's knee. So that's kind of the problems that can occur if you just completely copy someone else. And a bit of the logic behind him saying that, he doesn't have any rest days and he runs every single day was that's 52 days a year he has over his competition. So at that point, I was lost until I learned a concept from watching and taking notes from an interview of Tim Grover on Tom Bilyeu's YouTube channel, and learning more in depth by reading Tim Grover's book called Winning: The Unforgiving Race to Greatness, which he wrote this book on the lessons that he learned from being the strength and conditioning coach of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and their mindset and behaviors of what they did to get success. So in it, he talked about the idea that there isn't a straightforward road to success. Because if it was that easy, everyone would be achieving their goals all the time. There would be no one having a problem or getting lost on essentially how to achieve their goal. Or even a need for me to tell you how to get a 5K PB. So instead of copying everything someone does to reach the goal that you hope to achieve, what's more effective is something that he titled Finding Your Own Win. Because essentially the steps to achieve your win are infinite. And what is required for someone else isn't necessarily what is required for you, which can be logically explained based on circumstances. So for me to progress more on my quest, I had to move to Melbourne for it, because in Albury it didn't provide me the things that I needed to progress further on my quest. Whereas someone who has the same quest as me and was born in Melbourne doesn't have that problem. They don't have to move somewhere because they're already there. But what I have to do, they don't have to necessarily do the same things. Maybe they might have different struggles that I have. So what I did was I took that concept of, finding your own win and not copying someone else. And then I developed it further by the way that you find your win is by improving the process on which you do towards the factors that directly impact on your result. So in the case for a 5K PB, how I got there was determining what factors I had to control, that I can control, that affect that result, and also thinking of ways on how I can improve those processes as well. So those factors that I determined was my nutrition, my sleep, my training, and my mindset. All are things that I can control, I can impact. So when you listen to what I did to get that result, think of them as ideas of what you could start including in your own routine to impact those 4 factors for you to get your win to get that 5K PB. As to get to your own win, it may require, like what I said before, different things based on what I had to do to what you had to do, you will have to do to get your 5K PB. Because in life, we all start at different places, and different starting lines. So that's something you got to think about. So the first thing was nutrition. So my approach towards nutrition was I like to keep things simple because essentially the more you complicate things, the less likely you're actually going to follow through on them. So with my diet, it's purely just based on eating as close to my ancestors as I can in the terms of having what was naturally available for them during their time. So that involves cutting out ultra processed foods. So, in quotations, ultra processed foods, which are foods that have been heavily played with, containing multiple ingredients that you can't pronounce and have no idea what they are. So to give you a picture on what exactly I mean by that, I make my own sourdough loaf. So that only contains 3 ingredients: flour, sourdough starter, which sourdough starter is made of flour and water, That's it. Whereas compared to a Woolworths wholemeal loaf, there are 12 ingredients, and one of them being vegetable emulsifiers, 472 E and 481. Don't know what they are, but very tasty. This is just one of the many improvements that I made on my nutrition, and in the future I'll create a more detailed video on some of the other aspects on my nutrition that I worked on to improve, and the logic and reason behind me making those decisions in general to improve my performance sometime in the future. The next one of the factors is sleep. So I started to see sleep now more as an aspect of training. And by increasing the amount of sleep I would get each night by going from 8 hours of sleep to 9 hours of sleep. Now, the reason sleep is so important for your running and for your overall performance in life is this is when the majority of our recovery and absorption of that training takes place. So I like to use the analogy of you've got a bucket of water, that's your training, and you've got a sponge, that's your body. And when you go to training and you do the work, you dip that sponge into that bucket of water. And then afterwards, you would rinse it. So when you rinse out that sponge to absorb that training, to get the most out of that training, that would be your sleep. So one example of a positive aspect of our sleep on how it directly affects your recovery is 75% of your growth hormone, which that's responsible for muscle repair and growth, is released during the deep sleep stage of sleep, with the other 25% happening straight after an activity. So if you're cutting corners on your sleep, then you're missing a key part of that recovery time. So if you want to learn more about the importance of sleep and how exactly I get 9 hours sleep, which if you don't believe me, I can show you my watch right now there you go. That is 9 hours and 47 minutes of sleep. So I'm not joking. Then if you want to learn more about how I get those 9 hours sleep, then I suggest you to check out my previous video that I made where I go into more detail about that topic, which I'll link right here as well. Now, the next factor is training. So like I mentioned earlier, you have to find your own win towards achieving your goal. But what I'll tell you here is just take it as a universal approach to how you can use it in your training all around. So one aspect was I recognized that if I wanted to get a 5K PB in my training, I had to get used to running further than 5K. So physiologically, when I when I run that 5K distance, it feels shorter because I'm used to running longer and I have a greater, more endurance in my body because it's used to running longer than 5K. So an example in my training was previously my longest continuous run was I was doing 5K for my easy run. So when I set this 5K milestone for myself to get a PB, I moved that. I increased the distance I was running from 5K to 6K because you don't want to increase it too much or you get an injury. But I just increased it so slightly that my body could get used to running further than 5K. So another thing that I did was I also practiced running at the 5K pace, race pace that I set for myself, that I wanted to run to get that 5K PB. So it wasn't so much of a shock to my body and to my psychology when I was actually running at that pace during a 5K race. So for me to get my ideal, my 5K PB, the pace that I had to run was I had to run at 3 minutes and 20 seconds per kilometer. Now, the last thing I did to make sure that I practiced running at faster paces than that 5K race pace of 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So the reason for that was I wanted to get my body used to running, to push the threshold of intensity for myself and what my body considered as a hard effort by running at a faster pace. So then when it came to race day, to run at my 5K race pace, it wasn't like my body was like, whoa, this is the fastest I've ever run. It's like, no. Okay, we've run at harder efforts. So this is easier. Now, an example of a session on how I implemented that into my routine was I applied this principle during a regular session that my training squad does every Saturday at Caulfield Park. It's a VO2 max session where you run either 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, or something in between those efforts, one direction, and then you rest for what adds up to a total of 4 minutes. So if you ran a 3 minutes effort, you would rest for 1 minute. If you ran for 2 minutes, then you would rest at 2 minutes, etc. And then you would run back that same effort of, if you were running at 3 minutes in one direction, you run 3 minutes back. So for me, I was running 2 minutes on and off, and my race pace to get a PB was 3 minutes and 20 seconds per kilometer. So I was aiming to run those 2 minute efforts at 3 minutes flat pace, which is a significantly higher intensity than race pace. So then my psychology, because that's the most important part of it all, really, was used to a higher demand on the body than at the race pace. Now, lucky last is mindset. So for me, as I was going along my journey, I'm starting to develop ways to get me into the mindset in the right place before a race. So one thing I have added was wearing my own custom design running singlet, which I named Wings of Glory, because essentially the reason why I designed this singlet was when I ran, I wanted to feel and look like I was flying, which it's funny because mentioned that to someone and they said, well, you're probably going to be running so fast you won't even see the wings, but don't mind that. So, and hence how it gets the name is by the back of the singlet having those wings of glory on them. Now, other aspects that I added was above the wings on the back of the singlet, I included a Latin phrase. Oh, you're joking. So above the wings on the back of my t-shirt, I included the Latin phrase Vini, Vidi, Vici. So that, which translates to I went, I saw, I conquered. And this phrase was written in a letter by Julius Caesar that he sent to the Roman Senate after a swift victory at the Battle of Zela in 47 BC. So the reason why I added it was I wanted it to be seen by my competitors when I overtake them. And then on the front of that singlet, I added on the right side of my chest, here, I added ad victoriam, which that translates, another Latin phrase, which translates to towards victory. Now, this was a phrase used by the Romans as a rallying cry before entering battle. So the reason why I put it on the front of my singlet was that's the direction I'm running, towards victory. And then on the left side of my Wings of Glory singlet, I added the My Family crest, as that's where my heart is, and that's why essentially I run. So just think about the psychological edge that you can have by wearing something like this. And for this specific singlet, I strictly reserve it for only when I'm in races, because I don't want to lose the special feel of, running it all the time. It's just like when you get a new car, right? Like when you first drive it, it's so cool, it's amazing. But then when you keep using it over and over again, it kind of loses its feel because it becomes normal. That's something I wanted to prevent with this singlet, because I want to have that psychological edge over my competitors. And how that happens is, I feel powerful. So just take that as an example on maybe an idea on thinking about things that you can do before a race that can get you into the zone for you to get that 5K PB, where maybe you also design your own running singlet, or you listen to a pair of songs or a playlist that you really connect to only on race day, or maybe you buy a pair of race shoes that you strictly only wear for racing that makes you feel really fast. Because essentially, the reason why the mindset is so important is because that's half the battle. Because most of the time, you can have the fitness to run that result, but essentially, when you're pushing yourself to the max, because that's essentially what race day effort is. It's a 1 rep max. Your mind, you're pushing your body to the limits, and essentially when you do that, your mind starts to fight you, your weaker side. So you need everything you can to prepare yourself to fight that battle. Now, an action step that you can take today, based on all the information I provided you, is try to implement some of these strategies that I implement on those various factors that I've implemented, and start thinking about ways on how you can find your own win by identifying those factors on what are necessary for you to achieve it, and also thinking about, if I did have the time that that 5K PB that I want to run, what would be the action, what would be the steps every day that person would take? And usually your brain would come up with the ideas and the method on how to get there. So as always, it's never too late to start your dreams.